Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're in monitoring and evaluation, or if you're just diving into program design, you already know the hard truth. Setting a goal is the easy part. Proving you actually achieved it, that's the real beast. Today, we're going to bridge that gap. We're moving from simply understanding what a program intends to achieve to exactly how to measure it in the real world. Let's get into the step-by-step guide on developing good indicators.
Here is our builder's blueprint for today. We're going to cover why we need indicators, matching them to results, indicator types, and smart checks, the 16-step process, the indicator reference sheet, and finally, how to build a manageable portfolio.
Section 1. Why we need indicators. Every program starts out with big, beautiful results in mind, right? We want to train officials or boost community awareness or make local governance super responsive. But here's the catch. A result statement is just an intention. It tells us what we hope to deliver, but it doesn't give us a mechanism to measure if it's actually happening. USAID ID officially defines an indicator as a quantifiable measure of a characteristic or condition of people, institutions, systems, or processes that may change over time. The key takeaway? An indicator has to observe and measure change consistently. It's literally the bridge between your abstract hope for a program and the concrete reality on the ground. The basic architecture here always follows a really specific three-step progression. First, you've got the result, the broad change you want to see, like citizens knowing more about public services. Second is the indicator, which translates that broad result into something we can observe, like the percentage of citizens who can correctly identify at least 3 services. And third, you have the measurement, the actual survey or test you run to get that percentage. You absolutely have to have all 3 to succeed.
Section 2. Matching indicators to results.
Okay, matching indicators to results is arguably where most monitoring frameworks either make it or completely break down. It is absolutely vital that your indicator aligns perfectly with the specific level of result you actually want to achieve. Let's look at the absolute most common mistake in M&E. Imagine you have a program aimed at improving the capacity of local officials. The program proudly reports the number of officials trained. Stop right there. That is an output. It only tells us what you delivered. But delivering a workshop is definitely not the same as changing how people do their jobs. A true outcome indicator measures what happens because the output was used, like the percentage of local governments actually applying those new consultation processes. Training delivered does not automatically equal capacity improved.
And that brings us right to the results chain. Every indicator you build lives on one of these levels. Inputs measure your resources, like your budget. Activities measure if the work is actually happening. Outputs measure what's directly delivered, like classes taught. Outcomes? That's the expected behavioral or institutional shift resulting from those outputs. And finally, impact. Impact measures that massive long-term change, like overall citizen satisfaction, which honestly depends on a ton of factors totally outside your program's control. Keep in mind, each level here is asking a fundamentally different measurement question.
Section 3. Indicator types and smart checks.
Let's open up our toolkit and look at the essential quality checks we use to make sure our measurements are robust and ready for the real world. I'm sure you've heard of the SMART framework: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's incredibly useful, but we need to clarify something. SMART is a design test for feasibility. It's not the definition of a good indicator itself. I mean, you could have an indicator that sounds perfectly smart, say 100% of staff trained by Tuesday, but if it doesn't actually measure your intended result, it's still a terrible indicator. Some folks even extend this to smarter, tacking on evaluated and revised. It's a great reminder to tweak and improve things over time, provided you strictly document those changes so you don't ruin your historical comparisons.
As you're building your framework, you'll need to choose between different types of indicators. Standard indicators are predefined core metrics often mandated by donors like USAID or the EU. They're fantastic because they let donors aggregate and compare results across completely different programs. But they might totally miss the specific magic of your program. That's where custom indicators come in. If you're testing a totally unique citizen feedback mechanism, you might need a custom indicator tracking how many citizen recommendations actually get a documented response within 60 days. The good news? You don't have to choose standard or custom. The best programs use a really healthy combination of both.
You also need to think about how directly you're measuring something. A direct indicator measures the exact phenomenon, but sometimes what you want to track, like institutional trust, is just way too difficult or expensive to capture directly. In those cases, you'd use a proxy indicator. Now listen closely. This illustrates a major pitfall. Proxy indicators require incredibly careful justification. For example, relying on an increase in complaints submitted as a proxy for improved citizen trust is super dangerous. I mean, sure, complaints could be up because they finally trust you enough to speak up, or they could be up because your services are suddenly failing. You have to have an absolutely rock-solid rationale explaining why your proxy makes sense.
Section 4. The 16-step process.
We are transitioning into the assembly phase now, where we actually build an indicator through a clear, highly structured progression. Phase 1 is design. This is where you pinpoint the result, identify the exact change, pick your indicator type, draft it, and run it through that SMART test. But the absolute most critical part of this phase? Banishing vague words. If your draft relies on words like effective, adequate, or empowered, you have to clearly define what those mean operationally. Once you've done that, you establish your exact unit of measurement. Is it a raw number, a percentage, a ratio, or maybe a simple yes-no compliance check?
Speaking of percentages, if that's your unit, you have to define the math perfectly. Ambiguous denominators are a massive source of misleading, junk data. If your indicator is the percentage of trained officials applying participatory planning, you need an exact numerator, the number of assessed officials actually meeting the standard, and you divide it by an incredibly clear denominator, like the total number of trained officials assessed during that specific reporting period. Don't leave it to guesswork.
Once the math is defined, you establish your baseline. That's your starting value, measured using the exact same approach you'll use down the line. From there, you set your targets. And notice I didn't say invent targets. Targets have to be justified by your budget, historical performance, and the context on the ground. Setting milestones along the way is kind of like checking your GPS. It helps you figure out if you're actually on trajectory before you hit that final end date.
To wrap up the 16 steps, we move into logistics, focusing entirely on operational reality. You need to identify the exact data source. Are we using a household survey, a government database? What's the collection method? And what is the means of verification, or MOV, meaning what actual hard evidence, like a signed attendance record or an approved municipal policy, will prove your numbers are real? You've also got to define the frequency of measurement, assign responsibility to a specific person, and by the way, the program team is not a person. Determine necessary disaggregation like sex or geography, and finally, do a gut check on whether this indicator is actually affordable and feasible to track.
Section 5. The indicator reference sheet.
Now we take all those intricate, abstract little pieces and document them so that literally anyone can reliably interpret and recreate your measurement. Take a look at how this assembles into one highly professional document. This is an indicator reference sheet, or IRS. It puts the results, the indicator, the baseline, target, method, and frequency all in one place. Why does this matter so much? Because when staff turnover inevitably happens, the new team members will collect and interpret the data the exact same way you did. It's basically your foolproof recipe for reliable data over time.
Section 6. Building a manageable portfolio.
So we've talked about how to build a single, perfect indicator, but how do these all fit into a broader framework without completely overwhelming your staff? You need a balanced portfolio. Look, you don't need to force every single result into one specific type of indicator. A strong 5-year program, for example, is going to use a healthy mix of standard donor indicators, custom outcomes, quantitative stats, and qualitative deep dives. You might even use composite indexes for tricky concepts like resilience, as long as the methodology is sound. But the most important thing, your portfolio absolutely must be proportional to your program's scale, your budget, and your team's actual capacity to do the measuring. If you take nothing else away today, let it be this golden rule. Use the smallest set that adequately measures the important results. There is no universal donor rule that dictates a fixed number of indicators based on how long a program is. Adding more metrics just because a program is big is a terrible practice. If no one can explain exactly what management decision an indicator will support, or if it costs way too much to collect reliably, ditch it. Avoid indicator overload at all costs.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one ultimate guiding question for all the future frameworks you design. Whenever you're drafting an M&E plan, before you get lost in the weeds of standard versus custom or obsess over numerators and denominators, ask yourself this: what result are we actually trying to measure, and what evidence would credibly tell us whether it has been achieved? Keep that question at the absolute center of your work. If you do, your indicators won't just look pretty on paper, they will actually illuminate the real-world change your programs are making. Think about it. Thanks for learning with me today.